All right, welcome back. I'll kick off right where we left. So you were responding to the comment by Governor Omai.
Yes. So I was saying, when he spoke about Wike, when he spoke about Ayu, just like Festus Keyamo when he spoke about Peter Obi, saying that their actions helped them win the election, so they deserve a place of honor in their government. I think they were saying that in jest. What was more concerning for me was his confession that in the lead up to the 2019 presidential elections, even though they were with the PDP, the Southeast governors and most of the governors in the South, I think, agreed to give 25% of their votes to Buhari. And I think it speaks to the nature and the character of some of our politicians. I didn't understand why he said it, and I don't understand why you would make that type of deal with Buhari when you know he needs 25% to be declared president. He had, at the time, we had just come out of a recession, insecurity was still spiking, unemployment figures, I think that's when we got our first unemployment figures, were the highest they've ever been. So on what basis did you sit down and say you're representing your people to negotiate giving 25% of their votes to the APC? And how do you even allocate votes on that scale? So he indicted himself. I don't know what he thought what he was thinking about. I don't know what the air or water, what they put in the water in Rivers State, that they come out and start speaking like this. He didn't cover himself with glory. That wasn't a joke. That was something that he said they agreed to and he executed. And I was very disappointed to hear him speak in that manner.
All right, so that's fair enough. Before we delve maybe further into PDP matters, let me get your overview. Like I said, I've not had a chance to get your reactions to the elections so far.
Yeah.
So from presidency to the governorship, the state elections, what's your general take, especially now that for the presidency, a case has officially been filed, contesting that election by the PDP?
I think, unfortunately, this election is less about the will of the people and became more about INEC.
Which of the elections?
All the elections, and I'll speak to all of them. So at the presidential elections, you saw substantial non-compliance with the Electoral Act. It pains me because one of the advocates for that amendment, the late Ariyo Atoyedare, is one of my best friends. And we had sat down, myself, some other civil society actors who were pushing for the amendments. We had sat down and actually spoken to the INEC chairman, who had guaranteed on his honor that the provisions introduced, the key provisions of biometric accreditation with BVAS and the electronic transmission of results from the polling unit would be observed. He said it privately and he said it publicly that failure to do that would undermine the credibility of the elections. And he is not going to self-sabotage. Those were his words. And then to see him in the presidential totally fail to live up to that. Because I don't want people to think that it's just about uploading the results from the polling units. That's not the only thing in the Act. The Act says that you cannot even collate without checking what was uploaded, checking the results, and checking the BVAS accreditation data. It must match. And where there's a dispute, you use the uploaded results because those ones have a tendency for less manipulation. That's in the Electoral Act in section 64(4). It was put in there, so it's not optional. BVAS use is mandatory. INEC, I think, recorded about 80% compliance. There were parts of the country where BVAS was totally bypassed. But only they made the effort of using BVAS for biometric accreditation. But they didn't use the other clause. They didn't upload to the polling units in real time, and they didn't use those uploaded results to cross-check the information they were collating. So that's one of the grounds of our petition, that INEC substantially failed to comply with the provisions of the Electoral Act and their own guidelines. And so if the courts are not going to declare us winner at the first ballot because we believe we won the majority of legally cast votes, if the courts are not going to disqualify Tinubu on the fact that he was not qualified to contest the election in the first place. If the courts are not going to look at the margin of lead principle, margin of lead principle is that the number of cancelled votes should not be more than the margin of lead between the two leading contestants. We believe that the number of cancelled votes is more than the 1.8 that INEC allocated to Tinubu. So we are saying if you are not going to do any of those three things, if you are not going to take a decision on the status of the FCT, whether you need to get 25% or not, and in that instance, call for a runoff between ourselves and Tinubu, then cancel the entire farce of an election and hold a rerun. That sort of is the gist of our prayers.
When a rerun is held, you know, who conducts it? You know?
Hopefully, INEC will conduct you a little bit more shame than they did in the first instance. At least the world is watching. They have been indicted by local and foreign observers, and hopefully they will act with a little bit more honor than they displayed in the first elections. Right. You know, it's I want to speak about the governorship because INEC made themselves, just like the judiciary in previous times had made themselves principal actors in our elections, INEC have made themselves principal actors in these elections when they should only be umpires. I spoke about the margin of lead principle. On the 15th of April, INEC has scheduled supplementary elections for Kebbi and for Adamawa. I have some numbers here. In Kebbi, the cancelled votes is about 91,000. The margin of lead is 45,000. The APC candidate was in the lead, but everybody understands that because the cancelled votes were more than the margin of lead, the election is inconclusive. So you have to hold elections in those cancelled polling units. There's no controversy there. In Adamawa, Governor Finchi was ahead. He had won 13 out of 21 local government areas. Senator Binani had won about 8 at the time. We were ahead. There were 69 polling units cancelled, and altogether about 37,000 votes. The margin of lead was about 31,000. So if you hold the election, that variance was about 7,000. We understood that you needed to hold the elections in those council votes, just so that every vote every vote counts. Again, the margin of lead, like I said, 31,000, council votes 37,000. Adamawa was declared inconclusive. We're holding supplementary elections on the 15th. Now let us go to Ogun State. The margin of lead was 13,000 votes, 13,915. The council PVC, the council votes, was 33,000. Margin of lead was 13,000, 1-3. Council votes 33,750. Yet INEC went ahead to declare someone validly elected. And so when INEC is on the face of it, by their own decision, saying we cannot declare this election because the margin of lead is less than council votes. They did it in Kebbi, they did it in Adamawa, but coming to Ogun State, the margin of lead was almost 3 times less than the council votes. The returning officer went ahead to declare that election conclusive. And so, it's very painful when you see this type of interference by an umpire that is supposed to be unbiased. We are appealing this, but it casts a lot of doubt over the credibility of INEC. It casts a lot of doubt over the integrity of the INEC chairman. And you did ask the question, how are we sure that things are going to be better on the 15th of April? We have no idea. We can only hope. But it truly is disappointing that these elections are more about INEC and their failure than the will of the people.
All right, let's talk about that. I'd really like to break that down, which also takes us to the question from our caller, the issue of institutions. Now, it almost wants to set this precedent where people might not be as excited by legislation as maybe they should be. When the Electoral Act came, we had multiple iterations of programs every day discussing the late Wike-Ayu Tussle was actually my first guest on my other program. We talked about it repeatedly. I know he was a very strong advocate for it. So the issue now is, one might ask, what was the point of the excitement if the first general elections held under this system with the beavers and all that has this much irregularity, so to speak. Now, taking it back to the governorship, it almost seemed as though these things were up to, what is the word for them? Is it the returning officers?
Yeah.
So it wasn't about whether they are laid down rules or regulations. It was up to how the returning officer interprets them, or so to speak. So where one says this is inconclusive, another can decide and say, no, let it go. Where people say, they bring some numbers that don't tally. I actually, we saw that at some point, some results were stepped down because in certain, I think it was it Adamawa Fufori local government, I believe. I'm not quite sure, but
Yes.
I know that at some point during this election, a returning officer stepped down certain results because they confirmed from IREV and they said it doesn't tally, so this is what we're going with. So the question now is, what makes it so, difficult to simply, follow the laid down rules, or is there a misunderstanding somewhere? Because after all of this happened, I believe Senator Lawan said Nigerians did not understand the Electoral Act, that the issue of transmission is they're confused about it. So I really don't know much about that. But the main issue I want to ask now is, how do we get to a place where when this legislation is passed or thereabouts, it doesn't matter what kind of person is in charge of INEC or is the returning officer, it's really not up to them. It's the law. How do we get there so that people can be excited when they hear about these reforms?
So, it's a really good question. And I'm happy you mentioned what happened in Adama. It was the returning officer, one professor, I forget his name, who, when they brought manipulated results, said he's not going to use those results without checking with IREV. So he went to check the portal, got the results off portal, calculated it off portal. And, the frustrating thing is that the law says where there's a dispute, this is the process. So it's spelled out in that 64.4 and 64.5. It's
So do you
spelled
think
out.
they don't know?
So, and this is the problem. We have had 36 state elections. We only have one case where a returning officer, a collating officer, says there's a dispute here. I am going to check the IREF portal. We only have one case, and for everybody else who didn't follow the law, there are no penalties. There's no punishment. And if you don't punish bad behavior, then you just re-entrench it. It just continues. I think that's part of the problem. I also want to speak to, when we talk about institutions, I don't want to leave out the judiciary. On this program, I discussed how I had instituted a criminal complaint against the APC majority leader, who in December had threatened to deal with voters who don't support APC. Immediately after the elections, he was arrested by the police and charged with the murder of people. I think they attacked an INEC office. As I speak to you, the case has not been heard. I have been to court about 3 or 4 times. The judge keeps postponing and postponing and postponing. Elections have come and gone. People have died. And so there is a weakness in our institution. It's not just the laws, because the laws do exist. But you have individuals who are not applying the laws, I think because there are no penalties, and we don't have institutions strong enough to force compliance, regardless of the personal positions of the individuals in charge of those institutions. So we are still a long way from El Dorado. But I think elections are evolutionary. The Electoral Act is one of the strongest in the world. I think from the censure the INEC chairman will get, I heard foreign governments talking about placing people on visa bans. He doesn't leave these elections clothed in glory. And I think society recognizes that. And hopefully the next chairman will want to depart from the odorous footprints left by the current INEC chairman.
All right, so I guess that would be the way, to respecting of the laws. Yeah, but that being said, are there even provisions for punishment for Yeah, it's the Electoral Act, but I don't know. Is there punishment?
Yes,
for
but
INEC?
somebody has to go to court. Somebody has to raise the case. I told you the one about the majority leader.
Yeah.
At personal cost, I went to court because I was concerned.
Yeah.
So somebody has to decide that there's been an infraction, and we want the courts to punish this offender.
Right.
But a lot of Nigerians, I think, maybe it's because of a lack of faith in the judiciary. You hear now, APC tells you to go to court, and immediately your instinct is that, hang on, is it because they know something about the process that we don't know? So there isn't confidence in the judiciary, there isn't confidence in INEC. I'm just hoping that we build on the missteps of this electoral cycle. We have out of cycle elections in Edo, in Imo, in Ondo, in Anambra, in Kogi. So hopefully those will serve as testing grounds to the commission if they want to try and redeem their reputation.
All right. You know, if I'm not mistaken, your lawyer for that case was Victor Patola.
Yes.
Very interestingly, he actually got a victory in another case. I'd just like to get your thoughts on that, in the issue of use of temporary voters' cards. We're always talking about moving our electoral system forward, and that case makes me wonder, have we inadvertently gotten to a place, you know, progressed our system without knowing it? Because the ruling or the judgment basically says Nigerians should be allowed to vote with temporary voters' cards. And what that temporary voters' cards pretty much entails is just I think it's called the VIN number, which is something you get once you're done with registration. You don't have to go back and stand in long queues to get the plastic card.
Yeah.
So I don't know, do you think perhaps inadvertently we actually got to a place in the system that makes it easy, but we've not realized it? Because it seems as though, based on the ruling and, you know, the rationale behind the judgment, is that, you know, all you need is that number. There really is no need. There's no chip on the PVC that indicates your identity. It's just a plastic card. So could we have gotten to a place where we didn't even notice that we've become a little bit more advanced than we expected to be?
So for anybody who took part in elections, these concluded elections, you will know that the BVAS, your PVC, was useless. You line up. When you get to the front of the queue, they ask you to present the card. They just glance at it. They don't check. You know, my PVC, it's so old and faded, you can't even make out anything. But what happens is that they then use the machine to take your face or your fingerprints, and it's authentication by that machine, not your card, that actually allows you vote. It's only once you've been authenticated by the machine that you are given ballot papers. That is the process. You know, so yes, you know, the ruling was a commonsensical one. If you are in the INEC register, a piece of plastic shouldn't prevent you from voting, especially when biometric accreditation is the first stage of that process, not your card. So it's a good ruling. Curiously, INEC have said they are going to challenge it. I don't know why, because like you pointed out, it is progress. It opens up access to many more people.
It seems just like accidental progress.
Yeah, yes.
Because it's just a number. You know, I think if a lot of people knew this was all they needed, even, you know, there'll be more, you know, obstacle people trying to get their cards.
Yeah. So like I said, it's an evolutionary thing. Cycle upon cycle will get better, and we'll get to the point where bad faith actors are unable to alter the outcome of elections.
Right.
So,
you know, we can't leave without, you know, touching on some other issues. So I'd like to get your thoughts on things happening in, you know, other parties, particularly the ruling party. Okay, I would like to go into some speculations and some rumors, but let's go about the things we are sure about. And this is the language and the messages that have been passed by key persons within the ruling party. Take the instance of Mr. Bayo Onanuga, Mr. Festus Keyamo, who else? Well, these are the major parties anyway. But what do you make of their comments? Recently, Mr. Bayo Onanuga used a certain term that I can't even say on TV to refer to, you know, people who were questioning his candidates and all that. what do you think this means for beyond May 29th? Because officially, Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu is not yet the president, but it seems as though these are the people that are going to make up his cabinet. What do you make of their thoughts? Is it just banter, as some people call it?
So, for those who don't follow Mr. Bayo on Twitter, he said, he referred to Nigerians, I think obedient and people protesting, as sons of female dogs, was how he, let me spray perfume on the language he used. He called them sons of female dogs. He put out posts inciting people along ethnic lines, and then put out more posts doubling down that he has no apologies. But I'll ask you this. We saw videos of MC Oluomo threatening people. And MC Oluomo today is still walking about free. I saw another video of him celebrating their victory. A victory in Lagos that was procured with violence and death. And so when you have, again, it goes to crime and punishment. People who haven't read that book should read it. When you have a society that you can, in broad daylight, commit a crime, and in broad daylight, citizens see that there is no penalty for that crime, whether it's intra-party affairs or whether it's real criminality, you are then shaping society to adopt those models because they work. APC won Lagos. APC won the presidential election with this type of language and with this amount of violence. And so people coming up say, is there really any point in a manifesto when the person with the manifesto lost? Should I invest in thugs? Should I buy guns? Should I look to manipulate the electoral umpire? Those are the questions future people who want to run for elections will ask for them unless there is a reckoning. There's a reckoning served on people that have acted against the law and people who have violated the Electoral Act and the people within INEC who have been complicit in these violations. So, God forbid, we lose our case. I'm sure Mr. Bayo will be a part of government, but he's already showing us the type of, I think the tone of the Tinubu presidency. It's an unfortunate one. I didn't think we could go worse than the previous people. But I shudder to think we'll have a media team in the presidency composed of Festus Keyamo, FFK, and Mr. Bayo.
Well, what is the pushback to this? I think one of the issues I'll make it very particular with the PDP that people say is that your party seems very good at spotting or understanding or being able to pick out the issues, the strategies, but it's the response that people wonder what is the response. Take for instance, even you yourself, leading up to the election, you spoke about the spoiler effect, splitting of votes. You spoke about a lot of things, but then it just played out the way you said. It seemed that it was as though there was no actual, pushback. So the question now is, when people are going down, other people advise you go down, which is not what any of us, wish to happen. But what are the, would I call it, legal, wholesome ways to fight this? Or is it just a case where if you're not ready to fight dirty, you lose? How do you push back against this? I think,
very early on, I told you about the Leadership League. One of the reasons why we came together was on the issues of discipline, the selective discipline of members of the party who are clearly committing anti-party activities. The other thing I think was, and to be clear, as much as I am not supportive of the way and manner Ayu was removed because it was unconstitutional, outside of that, I think he also has a lot to answer about the way the PDP positioned itself and responded not just to the APC, but to Labour and NNPP. I will say something I haven't said on air before. a couple of weeks to the elections, we made a presentation to the leadership of the party. And Ayu did not believe Obi would get 2 million votes. Now, if you have a national chairman who is dismissing your main competitor, because the election show we ran neck and neck with Obi, assuming that INEC figures are correct. And even if they are not correct, himself and Kwankwaso took almost 8 million votes from our votes, because Kwankwaso's people and Obi fractured off the main PDP body. You know, so if you have a national chairman who is not able to read the current state of the politics, who is not able to gauge the temperature of the populace, who is not able to, because he's unable to gauge the temperature of the populace, provide the type of leadership people are yearning for, then you have to, without a doubt, also hold him complicit and responsible for the failures of the PDP going into the election. And I'm saying failure, not considering we lost, but failures saying that we would have won by such a huge margin that no opposition, no ruling party would have been able to write results to cover that gap. So I agree with you. There is, I'll call it a splinter cell within the party who will push for these reforms and for leadership that is more reflective of the party and of the aspirations of Nigerians.
All right, I won't be able to let you go without, putting this to you. As much as you're complaining, or let's say, what's the word?
Complaining.
No, I'm talking about the electoral process that you had issues with. You have, you're contending. I think that's a better word.
Yes.
That the electoral wasn't followed. The APCs, used some untoward
corrupt
means.
Practices.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there are also allegations for the PDP. And interestingly, it's funny, but it's not funny. But whenever some of these places are put to PDP members, they say, no, that's G5. And G5 is still PDP. So specifically speaking about Abia State and Enugu State, I think those are the two that where the PDP was considered to be the one, trying to muscle their way.
You didn't mention Rivers.
River State, pardon me. Yes, River State.
Yeah.
So, so people say, take for instance, in Abia State, I believe the second runner-up had the winner had almost double what the second runner-up had. And yet that election took about, 4 days to announce and so on. And people said manipulations are trying to happen here and there and so on and so forth. In Enugu, we also saw that, I don't know if the issue you raised about the difference and then council, if it applies to Enugu too. No. Well, so these issues, people are saying the PDP rigged, the PDP muscled people around, the PDP tried to, twist events the way they wanted and so on and so forth. So what do you make of that when people say, oh, they are one and the same at the end of the day? It's because they are not at the center. That's why we're not seeing them exhibiting what they are exhibiting in pockets across states.
So, let me address the G5 thing by zeroing in on Oyo State. Shea Makinde was one of the more vocal leaders of the G5. And even within his state, Oyo PDP took a position against him. The leadership of Oyo PDP took a position against him. But when the elections came around in Oyo State, there was virtually no violence. There was no intimidation. It felt like a carnival. As you will tell from my tone, I really don't like people who act against my party. So I was not at all impressed by Governor Shea Makinde's actions. But my personal feelings did not matter at all. Because Oyo people were faced with a simple choice at the ballot. Do we want to vote for this man who has delivered over the last 4 years and who we believe will deliver over the next 4? Or do we want to get pulled apart by partisan politics that doesn't affect our daily lives? That was the decision that happened that's what happened in Oyo State. And so when you talk about Abia, for instance, where Alex Oti won, and there was celebration in the streets, or Enugu where Umba won, and there are cries of rigging and whatever. And even in Rivers State where people died and there were widespread reports of violence and intimidation, you have to ask yourselves, I think, away from partisanship now, you know, if you perform, if your people believe in you, they will come out and support your mandate at the ballot box. And the only G5 governor, I think, who showed that, because Autumn lost his senatorial election, Autumn lost his governorship, Autumn lost the presidency to APC, even though he supported Peter Obi. Your people will follow you if they believe that you are taking them to peace, prosperity, and progress. So Oyo State indigents, I applaud them. They followed Shea Makinde. And I'm happy that in other places, like Abia, for instance, the people's mandate, the people's will was allowed to triumph. You know, so ultimately, it's not about saying that it is only where APC won there was rigging. I'm saying that, you know, I want to elevate the conversation that if you perform for your people, if you provide good leadership, you will not need thugs and militants and non-state actors to enforce your mandate at the ballot box.
What about Rivers State, do you think? You know, I think it's seen that, or it's said that the governor performed.
Again, you have to ask yourself, so if you look, because I'm a data scientist, you look beyond the spectacles of commissioning of projects. Rivers State is one of the poorest states in the nation when you talk about their unemployment figures. They have one of the highest unemployment rates in Nigeria. And so is that prosperity being tried? When you see the infrastructural projects being put out, is that really translating to improve livelihoods of people? I mean, what's the point of a flyover if you don't have food to eat? You don't have a car, you don't have a bike, you don't have a keke, you don't have a bicycle. Flyovers mean nothing to you. So I'm not looking at, I looked at Rivers IGR. Whilst people were doubling and trebling their IGR between 2015 and now, Rivers barely made any impressions in increases in IGR. You know, so the indices don't really back the propaganda we see on television. And to answer
PDP
your
propaganda?
Well, I'm not doing propaganda for him now. Right. So the governors do their, and when I say propaganda, I just mean the information official government handles will put out. Because Shea Makinde does a lot of, I won't say propaganda, puts out a lot of information on official channels. But that reflects their reality in Oyo State. So maybe the incoming governor in Rivers has to find a way to tie the huge resources Rivers generates and link it to improved economic and developmental indices of the Rivers people. I think that link was missing in Governor Wike. He did a lot of projects, but the indices don't show that translated to better lives for his people.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Osanene, for coming and sharing your thoughts. It's always a pleasure to have you. Thanks for coming.
Always a pleasure.
Okay. All right, that's what we'll take on this edition of the Polity. Do join us once again every weekday, 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. We'll bring to you discussions and conversations and updates on the state of the nation, politics, governance, and the point at which these intersect. Thanks for staying with us today. Do join us tomorrow. I am Mamadine Ogbewe. Bye for now.